Hey, a few days ago, I did a video on how long it takes a comic book to be made, and I hope you watched that video. I think it was informative. It was one of the better ones. So every now and then you do one, and it's like, yeah, this is the one I want people to watch. I wanted that one because it's a good grounding for how long it takes comics to get produced, and why sometimes when fan reaction is super negative, why it takes a long time for that ship to turn around and for them to course correct. But I wanted to talk specifically about those changes. When a comic does need to change, what kind of things happen? How do those changes get made, and how do they get greenlit? How does it all work, especially with these long schedules? Let's talk about that. Hey everybody, this is Perch. In light of future state and kind of this idea of, hey, aren't some of these things what we heard 5G was going to be? And it feels like they're just kind of recycled now, that they're getting just reused, and that's not fair. We shouldn't have reuse. And besides, fan reaction was really negative. So what are we going to do about that? Well, I did that video a few days ago talking about how long it takes to make a comic, and keep in mind that right now, if you think about future state stuff coming out in January, it means a lot of the planning and the original production of some of this work was back, if it was in January, it'd be back in like May of this year. So several months ago. But it's worse than that because the pandemic actually caused some things to shut down for a few weeks. And there were a lot of confusion. There are rewrites or changes because the fan reaction to 5G or G5 or future state was poor out the gate. And like we talked about in other videos, a lot of it too was the messaging kind of got out of control. I got this very kind of angry person in the comments who said, "No, this is I was basically, the premise was, hey, future state 5G, it was never meant to be a lot of the things that people were criticized or claiming that it was." And that's triggered some really angry people, but not the people I'd expect. I would expect that Rich Johnston and folks from Bleeding Cool would be mad because it's them I'm really calling out for shoddy reporting. But in most cases, the people who either posted negative comments, or I got some pretty nasty emails. They were from people who are really hooked in to the outrage videos that were made about 5G, about how horrible this forced diversity and on and on and on it was. What's weird to me is, like, hey, if you believe something was going to be terrible and then it turned out it wasn't as terrible as you believed, but maybe you still don't like it, like, isn't that still a win? Like, things are moving in a positive direction. I'm confused by the people who are like really angry about the fact that their anger over 5G turned out to be somewhat unwarranted. I don't know. People's brains work in weird directions. But at any rate, there's a couple things that go into changes. First off, if you're an editor and you work for a publisher, you may have already sunk some money into some of these efforts. And if that's the case, at least part of your mind is going to be, can I use this work somewhere else? Can this become a short story? Can this be adapted in some way so I don't have to start from scratch, so I can reclaim some of the money, some of the pages that have been created? Keep in mind, comics is not like a massive margin business. So, the idea of spending a bunch of money, and in many cases, if you remember that original chart where you had kind of concept, idea, pitch, and then you had some plots being written, it's right about the time you found a creative and who is going to write your story where it starts to get expensive to change course, at least expensive to change course very quickly. And once it gets into the art phase, once pages start to be drawn, once character designs start to be commissioned, and so on, then you've dunked a bunch of money into this business, and the idea of just scrapping it or pulping it or shredding it and starting all over is daunting, even if the fan reaction is pretty poor. It's one of the reasons why the New Warriors gimmick, a comic, whatever it was that Marvel was going to do, that had Safe Space and Snowflake and a bunch of characters that just got hardcore panned. I do expect that comic to show up at some point. I don't think it's just going to be buried and forgotten and we'll never see it again. I do believe that it will return in some form. And I believe that from the standpoint of some money was clearly spent. In many cases, covers were drawn and designs were done by some of Marvel's more expensive creators. So, it's not it's not like they can just dump all that stuff and say, well, our bad, let's just start over again. They've put money into it, and I think that those ideas will come out in some form or another. I'm sure that there's some conversations being made to say, hey, maybe calling a character, safe space and snowflake wasn't a good idea. Maybe that feels a little bit like we're taking the piss out of our fan base, or whoever, whatever it might be. I'm sure there's some rework that's taking place, but I also expect that comic to continue. But it's one reason why I think here I'll criticize comics, aggressively for a moment. One of the things that I think is always very poor that gets done is that creators will sometimes send comics to early looks. Early looks at things. Now, rarely, really early, rarely like in the plot phase. Although it's not uncommon. In fact, I would say it's reasonably common that creators will send plot outlines and other things to people they trust in the industry for review and kind of to check it out. Now, there's a million reasons why you shouldn't do this as a creator. I mean, you have to really trust the person you're giving it to, that they're not going to steal the idea, they're not going to leak it, or and you can get in a lot of trouble with your employer if they're paying you for things. It is meant to be private between the writers and editors, and there's a lot of disclaimers, and certainly for new people coming in, there's a lot of warnings about if you leak this stuff, you're in some trouble, and there should be. And it's funny because the comic industry, this is a case where an NDA would probably be a pretty good idea, a mutual NDA in particular, where the writer is coming up with a plot early on, some sketch outlines, that it is kept heavily, heavily protected, and it's protected the other direction too for the writer, so nobody can leak. But that's not how NDAs are typically used in comics. But at any rate, um, it, one criticism, like I said, I was going to get to a heavy criticism. I know some people are really salivating at that concept, but it's that the comic industry is where it's too much of a bubble and too insular for its own good. This is where you have opportunities for good feedback, but creators tend to share things amongst themselves, and it's such an insecure industry in a lot of cases that creators won't say and won't be honest. They'll say, "Give me your honest feedback. Do you think this story idea will work?" And I've had, I would say, I don't know, dozens, like more than 20 easily, creators who, when having drinks or meeting up with people, will say things like, "Oh yeah, this other creator shared this story idea with me. It was complete and utter dog shit." Of course, I couldn't say that because it would hurt their feelings and they'd get triggered, and then I wouldn't get work, or I'd create an enemy. But he's like, they told me, "Oh, please tell me your honest opinion. Please tell your honest opinion." It's like, I didn't know what to say, so I just sat on it for a while, and then I'm like, "Oh no, it's great, man. Totally great. Good story. This is amazing. Whew, what a great story you did." But I was totally lying to him. And I hear that stuff, and I'm like, you know what you need? You need somebody to bounce these ideas off of and get some feedback on this stuff, who's not inside the comic industry, who's not somebody who you're worried if they give you honest bad feedback that you're gonna it's going to somehow come back to haunt you. Because I think that there's an echo chamber type effect that occurs within comics where, super dumb concepts and bad ideas that any reasonable comic shop owner or big collector would tell you, "Hey, this is never going to sell in my shop." But I know a comic shop owner who gets a bunch of this early work to look at as well, and they fall into the same trap. They're like, "Well, I can't give honest feedback, or I'm going to stop getting the early work. I want to see these early plots, and if I say it sucks, then they're gonna stop sending it to me." And it's like, okay, well then what are we? We're just jerking each other off. Then there's no actual criticism. There's no opportunity for improvement to be made. But anyway, I went off on a tangent there. At any rate, if the plot comes in and the comic is out, it goes, and some early solicits go out, and the fan reaction is negative, there may be a chance to adjust some things. But then we're talking about issue 2 and issue 3 and others. And so one thing that you've seen, I'm trying to think of something, the World of Wakanda book or Future Foundation, these books that get canceled within like 2 to 4 issues, just really, really rapidly. And you say, well, the initial fan reaction must have been negative. Actually, it probably has a lot less to do with that than you think. There is a case where some of this early work will come in and they'll do, final order cut off. They'll see the initial orders and they're like, wow, nobody is buying this. So let's cut our losses. Now, we thought it was a weaker seller and we were trying to make room in the budget to produce it. This is the case with the World of Wakanda book, whereas like we don't really have the plan to do this, but we're wanting to maximize off that Black Panther movie. We hear it's going to be pretty good, so we want to get some stuff out there. And then it's like the initial orders come in, and it's like, all right, well, this one's going to bomb. So we still, even there, we're still going to put out a couple issues because we're already committed. We already have a couple in the can, so at least get those kind of cleared out and everything else. But we won't go past issue 3 or issue 4. We'll just call it a day there. But you think about how that entire process could be, money better spent and planning better had if there were some, decent people who could, make comments on these comics and potentially get in front of them before they go south. But yeah, it is what it is. I mean, what are you going to do about that? But that's a case where it's tough because I think comics really needs good fan interaction. I guess the point I'm trying to make here is, do you ever feel like in comics that the feedback of the fans, what fans think about the comics, is not getting through to the publisher? That there's a disconnect between the two. And I guess I'm saying you're right. There isn't a good channel, and there's a couple of reasons. It's not just because of the standard answer of like, oh, the creators are jerks and they don't want to listen to the fans anyway. There's other logistical problems, like there's a timing issue. The comic industry has not set itself up to have this kind of back and forth. And I think in this case, the comic industry kind of wants to be like books. It wants to be like how authors create a book or directors create a movie, and it gets budgeted and it gets produced and out it goes. The problem is, I don't think that comics are really like movies and books because it's a monthly thing, because the budget is a lot lower, because it does require fan engagement a lot tighter, and it can be produced a lot cheaper. I mean, logistically, it would be very hard for a TV pilot and for a movie and for other things to get kind of feedback early on and then make big adjustments. But even there, I would argue that the movie industry and TV shows and other things have a better mechanism for this. They'll do focus group testing, and they'll actually they'll do things that allow them to get some feedback and go back and make some changes. You've heard about movies getting rewrites or reshoots and other changes. A lot of that is because it went in front of a focus group of people who are not the industry, who are not the friends of the director or the producers, and they said, hey, we didn't like this tested poorly. You ever heard that phrase, this tested poorly? Well, what's the equivalent of that for comics? It doesn't really have one. The comic industry will sometimes tell you, and I've had editors tell me, oh, we do have the equivalent of a focus group testing. That's where we send out advanced comps to our friends in the comic shops and other creators. And I'm like, well, hold on a second. You identified the problem with that plan right there. You sent it off to your friends. That you don't send this off to your friends. A focus group is not supposed to be your friends. You know how you've seen the stereotypical focus group where the people watching are behind one-way glass and they're seeing stuff, and it's like, oh man, they're saying really hard things about this product. It's hard to listen to that. It's like, yeah, it should be hard to listen to it because it's honest feedback. It's not a collection of your buddies fawning over the great thing that you made. That's the problem. At any rate, this is kind of all what goes into kind of comics, and so yeah, this is, I'm sure, one of those cases where I'm providing a detail or a nuance, but I think it's an important one. It's a case where no, the comic industry is disconnected from their fans, but there's logistical reasons why that is in terms of timing, and there's also a bad structure in place where they're just, it's not set up or equipped to take feedback in the way that it really should. Anyway, that's a little bit more on this topic. I know some people had some questions about it, so I hope that's useful and helpful. At any rate, hey, other comments, questions, do you have a solution to this? How would you do it? If you were a publisher, how would you get feedback on concepts, comics, and ideas early on so you could make better adjustments, so you could potentially make changes to your comic that would make it more successful in the marketplace? What would you do? How would you solve this problem? Let me know in the comments below. Like, subscribe, click the bell for notifications. If you're if you're on YouTube listening to this, please do check to make sure that you're still subscribed, because YouTube unsubscribes people all the time. No, not sure why, but there you go. But at any rate, thanks for listening.